In the annals of modern history, the collapse of the Soviet Union stands as one of the most significant geopolitical events. Remarkably, this monumental shift occurred without a direct military confrontation between the two superpowers, the United States and the USSR. Instead, it was a complex interplay of political strategy, economic pressure, and ideological warfare. This narrative not only reshaped the global order but also marked the end of an era defined by Cold War tensions. For Vietnam and other countries, understanding this historical transition offers insights into how strategic non-military actions can influence global powers and shift international dynamics. The dissolution of the Soviet Union transformed economic policies, realigned alliances, and opened up new markets, impacting global trade and political landscapes. As we delve into this story, we uncover how a combination of American policies and internal Soviet weaknesses led to this peaceful yet profound change, highlighting the power of strategic diplomacy and economic influence over military might. A pivotal moment in the decline of the Soviet Union was the introduction of Mikhail Gorbachev's policies of glasnost, openness, and perestroika, restructuring in the mid-1980s. These reforms aimed to revitalize the Soviet economy and political system but inadvertently accelerated its demise. Glasnost allowed an unprecedented level of transparency and freedom of expression, leading to increased public criticism of the government. Perestroika sought to introduce market-like reforms within the socialist framework, but faced resistance and created economic disarray. The combination of these policies undermined the central authority and exposed deep-seated issues within the Soviet Union, such as corruption and inefficiency. This policy shift not only destabilized the internal structure but also weakened the Soviets' global influence, paving the way for Eastern European countries to break away and assert independence. For Vietnam, these events were a reminder of the importance of balancing reform with stability. The collapse of the Soviet Union had profound implications for the global geopolitical landscape. It marked the end of the Cold War, a period characterized by ideological and military rivalry between the United States and the USSR. This shift resulted in the emergence of the United States as the sole superpower, influencing international policies and economic systems worldwide. The dissolution of the Soviet Union also led to the formation of 15 independent republics, reshaping political boundaries and alliances. For nations like Vietnam, this transition offered new diplomatic and economic opportunities, as it paved the way for increased engagement with Western countries and integration into the global economy. The end of the Soviet bloc also allowed for the expansion of NATO and the European Union, further altering geopolitical dynamics. Understanding these changes is crucial for comprehending current international relations and the distribution of global power. To comprehend the Soviet Union's collapse, it's essential to understand its historical context. The USSR was founded in 1922 after the Bolshevik Revolution led to the overthrow of the Russian monarchy. It was a union of multiple republics, heavily centralized under communist ideology. Throughout its existence, the Soviet Union aimed to establish a socialist state, spreading its influence across Eastern Europe and beyond. However, the rigid centralized planning, lack of political freedom, and suppression of dissent created systemic issues. By the 1980s, these problems, coupled with a stagnant economy and costly military engagements, made the Soviet system unsustainable. Understanding this background helps explain how deep-seated issues and external pressures led to its eventual collapse. For Vietnam, a nation also influenced by socialist principles, these lessons underscore the importance of adaptability and reform in maintaining political and economic stability. The collapse of the Soviet Union was significantly influenced by key figures such as Mikhail Gorbachev, Ronald Reagan, and Margaret Thatcher. Gorbachev, the General Secretary of the Communist Party, introduced transformative policies aimed at reforming the Soviet system. However, his efforts to modernize the economy and political structure met with resistance and unintended consequences. On the other hand, U.S. President Ronald Reagan played a crucial role with his aggressive stance against communism, emphasizing military buildup and economic pressure through initiatives like the Strategic Defense Initiative. British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher was another pivotal figure, supporting Reagan's policies and advocating for a strong Western alliance against Soviet influence. These leaders' actions and ideologies contributed significantly to the geopolitical shifts that ultimately led to the Soviet Union's dissolution. Understanding the roles of these figures provides valuable insights into how leadership and international relations can shape global events. The timeline of events leading to the Soviet Union's collapse spans several decades, with key moments accelerating its downfall. The 1979 Soviet invasion of Afghanistan drained resources and drew international condemnation, contributing to economic strain. In the 1980s, Gorbachev's policies of glasnost and perestroika aimed to revitalize the USSR but instead exposed systemic weaknesses. By 1989, Eastern European countries began breaking away, inspired by these reforms and the weakening Soviet grip. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 became a powerful symbol of the communist bloc's collapse. In 1991, a failed coup by hardline communists in Moscow further destabilized the government, leading to the declaration of independence by Soviet republics and the formal dissolution of the USSR in December 1991. This timeline highlights how internal reforms, external pressures, and geopolitical shifts culminated in the end of a superpower. The Soviet Union's collapse has historical parallels with other empires that disintegrated under internal pressures and external challenges. For instance, the Roman Empire's fall was marked by economic troubles, military overreach, and internal corruption, similar to the Soviet experience. The British Empire also faced a gradual decline as colonies sought independence and economic strains mounted post-World War II. These historical references illustrate the universal challenges empires face when expansion outpaces sustainable governance and economic management. For Vietnam, these parallels highlight the importance of learning from history, ensuring that economic reforms and governance adapt to changing internal and external conditions. Understanding these historical patterns helps in predicting potential outcomes and preparing for future challenges. One of the critical factors leading to the Soviet Union's collapse was its economic strain. The centralized economic model relied heavily on state planning and control, which led to inefficiencies and stagnation. By the 1980s, the Soviet economy faced severe challenges, including declining productivity, technological lag, and an inability to compete with Western economies. The military expenditure, especially during the arms race with the United States, further drained resources. Additionally, the Soviet Union's involvement in Afghanistan was a significant financial burden. These economic pressures exacerbated public dissatisfaction and weakened the government's ability to maintain control. For Vietnam, this underscores the importance of economic diversification and adaptation to global market conditions to ensure resilience against similar pressures. The Soviet Union's military expenditure was a significant factor in its economic decline. During the Cold War, the USSR engaged in a costly arms race with the United States, aiming to match or surpass American military capabilities. The Strategic Defense Initiative proposed by Ronald Reagan further pressured the Soviet economy as it tried to compete technologically. The heavy investment in defense diverted resources from crucial sectors like consumer goods and infrastructure, leading to shortages and declining living standards. This unsustainable spending contributed not only to economic strain but also to public discontent, as citizens faced scarcity amidst a heavily militarized state. For Vietnam, this serves as a lesson in the importance of balancing defense spending with economic development to maintain social stability and growth. At the heart of the Cold War was a profound ideological clash between communism and capitalism. The Soviet Union championed a centrally planned economy and a single-party state, while the United States advocated for free market capitalism and democratic governance. This ideological divide influenced global politics, with each superpower seeking to expand its influence by supporting aligned regimes worldwide. The Soviet Union's commitment to spreading communism often led to conflicts and proxy wars, further straining its resources and political stability. As the world witnessed the economic successes of capitalist nations, the Soviet model's inefficiencies became more apparent, leading to growing internal dissent and calls for reform. For Vietnam, understanding this ideological battle underscores the importance of developing a political and economic system that reflects national values while remaining adaptable to global changes. In the latter half of the 20th century, the arms race between the United States and the Soviet Union reached unprecedented levels. The nuclear buildup was not just about amassing weapons, but also about showcasing technological and military superiority. The U.S. initiated programs like the Strategic Defense Initiative, aiming to protect against potential Soviet attacks, compelling the USSR to increase its military spending significantly. This escalation strained the Soviet economy, which was already grappling with inefficiencies and stagnation. The constant pressure to match U.S. advancements led to unsustainable expenditures. Furthermore, the psychological impact of the arms race on Soviet leadership cannot be overstated. The fear of falling behind in nuclear capabilities pushed the USSR into a corner, limiting its ability to invest in other critical areas like infrastructure and civilian needs. This relentless pursuit of military parity contributed to the eventual economic exhaustion of the Soviet Union. During the Cold War, strategic talks played a crucial role in the dynamics between the United States and the Soviet Union. High-level meetings between leaders, such as the historic summits between President Ronald Reagan and General Secretary Mikhail Gorbachev, were pivotal. These talks often centered around arms control and reducing nuclear arsenals, aiming to ease tensions and foster a more stable global environment. The negotiations, marked by mutual suspicion, were nonetheless essential in paving the way for significant treaties like the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces (INF) Treaty in 1987. These diplomatic engagements not only reduced the immediate threat of conflict but also exposed the internal challenges faced by the Soviet government. The need for openness and reform became apparent, leading Gorbachev to introduce policies like glasnost and perestroika. These reforms inadvertently accelerated calls for more profound changes within the Soviet Union, contributing to its eventual dissolution. Western culture played a subtle yet powerful role in undermining the Soviet Union. The allure of Western music, fashion, and media gradually permeated Soviet society, offering a stark contrast to the austere and controlled cultural environment propagated by the Soviet regime. The introduction of Western products through black markets and limited official channels exposed Soviet citizens to alternative lifestyles and ideologies. This cultural infiltration was not just about consumer goods. It represented the broader appeal of Western freedoms and individualism. Young people in particular were drawn to the rebellious spirit and creative expression found in Western music and films, which often carried implicit messages of freedom and self-determination. This quiet cultural revolution eroded the ideological grip of the Communist Party, as more citizens began to question the restrictions imposed on them and aspire to a different way of life. The cultural shift was a significant undercurrent that contributed to the Soviet Union's eventual collapse. The economic fallout of the Soviet Union was a culmination of years of systemic inefficiencies and external pressures. Centralized planning, a hallmark of the Soviet economy, failed to adapt to the changing global economic landscape. The focus on heavy industry and military production neglected consumer goods and technological innovation, leading to shortages and stagnation. The arms race, as discussed earlier, further drained resources away from vital economic sectors. Additionally, global oil price fluctuations in the 1980s severely impacted Soviet revenues, as the economy heavily relied on energy exports. The lack of foreign investment and technological lag resulted in inferior products and low productivity. These economic challenges were exacerbated by corruption and bureaucratic red tape, which stifled entrepreneurial initiatives and discouraged efficiency. As citizens faced empty shelves and declining living standards, the legitimacy of the Soviet government was increasingly questioned, setting the stage for reform and ultimately dissolution. Economic indicators during the final years of the Soviet Union painted a grim picture. GDP growth had stagnated, with some estimates suggesting a contraction in real terms. Inflation, although officially controlled, was rampant in practice, eroding purchasing power and savings. The black market thrived as citizens sought basic goods and services unavailable through official channels. Industrial output, once the pride of Soviet economic might, declined sharply, reflecting inefficiencies and obsolescence in production methods. The labor force heavily employed in state-run enterprises faced underemployment and decreasing real wages. Internationally, the Soviet ruble was non-convertible, limiting trade and investment opportunities. Trade deficits widened as the country struggled to compete globally with outdated technology. These indicators underscored a deeply troubled economy, unable to sustain itself or meet the needs of its population. The economic malaise was a critical factor in the public's loss of confidence in the Communist Party's promise of prosperity. Public sentiment in the Soviet Union during its final years was marked by disillusionment and a desire for change. The promises of communism, prosperity, equality, and social justice seemed increasingly hollow as economic hardships persisted. Long queues for basic necessities and the visible decline in quality of life fueled public frustration. Glasnost, a policy introduced by Gorbachev, allowed for greater openness and freedom of expression, inadvertently giving voice to widespread grievances. Media began to report on previously censored topics, highlighting corruption and bureaucratic inefficiencies. Citizens, especially the youth, became more politically active, demanding reforms and greater personal freedoms. This shift in public opinion was crucial, as it signaled a loss of faith in the Communist Party and its ability to deliver on its promises. The growing discontent pressured the Soviet leadership to consider reforms, setting the stage for eventual political and social transformation. Analyzing data from the final years of the Soviet Union provides a quantitative perspective on its decline. Economic indicators such as GDP, industrial output, and foreign trade reveal a clear pattern of stagnation and decline. Between 1985 and 1991, GDP growth was erratic, often dipping into negative territory, while industrial output fell by nearly 20%. Inflation rates, although officially downplayed, were estimated to be in the double digits, further eroding economic stability. Foreign trade data shows a widening deficit, with exports failing to keep pace with imports, exacerbating the financial strain. Labor productivity also suffered, with outdated technology and inefficient work practices hindering output. Additionally, demographic data indicated a declining population growth rate, compounded by rising mortality rates and emigration. This statistical analysis underscores the multifaceted challenges the Soviet Union faced, reinforcing the narrative of an economy and society in crisis. Experts provide valuable insights into the strategic dynamics that contributed to the Soviet Union's collapse. One key perspective emphasizes the role of strategic miscalculations by the Soviet leadership, particularly in underestimating the economic burden of the arms race. Analysts also highlight the impact of Gorbachev's reforms, which, while well-intentioned, destabilized the existing power structures without providing a clear path forward. The push for openness and restructuring inadvertently weakened the Communist Party's control. Furthermore, geopolitical strategists note that the Soviet Union's inability to effectively compete with Western economic systems left it vulnerable to external pressures. The combination of internal policy failures and external economic competition created a perfect storm, leading to the Soviet Union's demise. These insights illustrate the complexity of the challenges faced and the strategic errors that accelerated the collapse. The collapse of the Soviet Union is viewed differently by various analysts and historians. Some argue that the internal economic dysfunctions were the primary cause, while others emphasize external pressures, such as the strategic initiatives by the United States. Western analysts often highlight the effectiveness of economic and cultural influences, whereas Russian historians might focus on the internal political missteps and the failure of reform policies. Additionally, there are perspectives that consider the role of nationalistic movements within the Soviet republics as a critical factor. These movements, seeking independence, further fragmented the already weakened central authority. The diversity of perspectives underscores the complexity of the Soviet Union's collapse, revealing that it was not a single cause but a confluence of multiple factors. This multiplicity of viewpoints provides a more nuanced understanding of the events that led to the end of the Soviet era The collapse of the Soviet Union had significant implications for Southeast Asia, including Vietnam. As a key ally of the Soviet Union, Vietnam relied heavily on Soviet economic and military support. The dissolution of the USSR forced Vietnam to reassess its foreign policy and economic strategies. This led to the Choi Moi renovation reforms in 1986, which aimed to transition Vietnam from a centrally planned economy to a socialist-oriented market economy. The reforms focused on liberalizing trade, encouraging foreign investment, and improving agricultural productivity. Additionally, the geopolitical landscape in Asia shifted, prompting Vietnam to seek new alliances and trade partnerships. The end of Soviet support also accelerated Vietnam's integration into the global economy, eventually leading to its membership in organizations like ASEAN and the WTO. The Soviet Union's collapse thus served as a catalyst for Vietnam's own economic transformation and its repositioning on the global stage. As the Soviet Union edged towards collapse, its diplomatic engagements underwent significant transformations. The era marked a shift from aggressive posturing to more conciliatory approaches, particularly with the United States and Western Europe. This change aimed to secure economic aid and political support amid growing internal strife. The Soviet Union's participation in international summits, such as the Helsinki Accords, demonstrated a willingness to engage in dialogue on human rights and security measures. These moves were crucial in reshaping regional diplomacy, fostering an environment where former adversaries could transition into partners. For Vietnam, the diplomatic realignment meant new opportunities and challenges. The country's historical ties with the Soviet Union had to adapt to a world where Western influence was on the rise. This shift necessitated recalibrating Vietnam's foreign policy strategies to maintain its own national interests in a rapidly changing geopolitical landscape. The broader regional diplomacy saw Southeast Asian nations exploring new alliances and partnerships, underscoring the interconnectedness of global political dynamics. The economic ties between the Soviet Union and the rest of the world were fundamentally crucial during its final years. The Soviet economy, heavily reliant on centralized planning, struggled to compete in the global market. Trade relations with Western nations were increasingly leveraged as tools for political influence and economic survival. The introduction of policies like perestroika aimed to modernize and open the Soviet economy, but were met with mixed success due to systemic inefficiencies and resistance within. For Vietnam, the dissolution of economic ties with the Soviet Union necessitated finding new trade partners to sustain its economy. The shift encouraged Vietnam to pursue toThe, a series of economic reforms that opened up the country to foreign investment and market-driven growth. This transformation not only influenced Vietnam's economic trajectory, but also integrated it more closely with ASEAN economies and global markets. The adjustments in economic ties during this period illustrate the complex interplay between political change and economic adaptation on a global scale. As we look forward, understanding the potential future scenarios that could unfold from past geopolitical shifts is crucial. The collapse of the Soviet Union set precedents for how superpowers might rise and fall. One scenario involves the potential reemergence of Russia as a dominant global player, leveraging its vast natural resources and strategic geographic positioning. Another possibility is the continued rise of China as a global economic powerhouse, reshaping international power dynamics. For Vietnam, these scenarios present both risks and opportunities. A resurgent Russia could alter regional security dynamics, while China's economic expansion could open new markets but also heighten strategic competition. Understanding these potential futures allows countries like Vietnam to better navigate their own strategic paths, balancing relationships with major powers while advancing national interests. Monitoring these scenarios also provides insight into how global shifts may impact economic and diplomatic strategies in Southeast Asia. In assessing the ongoing impacts of the Soviet Union's collapse, several indicators are worth monitoring. Firstly, the political stability of former Soviet states remains a critical measure, as instability could trigger broader regional disruptions. Economically, the performance of these states within global markets can signal shifts in economic power and influence. Additionally, military developments, particularly in Russia and neighboring areas, are crucial to understanding security dynamics. For Vietnam, observing changes in energy markets, where Russia plays a significant role, could provide insights into economic opportunities or challenges. Furthermore, international alliances and trade agreements involving these countries can reveal the direction of geopolitical trends. By staying informed about these key indicators, nations like Vietnam can better anticipate changes in the global landscape and adjust their foreign and economic policies accordingly. These indicators not only highlight potential risks, but also unveil opportunities for strategic engagement and economic collaboration. Understanding the collapse of the Soviet Union requires a balanced analysis that considers multiple perspectives. While some attribute the dissolution to internal economic mismanagement and political stagnation, others highlight the role of external pressures from the West, including strategic economic sanctions and diplomatic isolation. The interplay between internal and external factors created a complex environment that precipitated the eventual collapse. For Vietnam, these lessons underscore the importance of maintaining a diversified economy and robust diplomatic relations to withstand global pressures. The Soviet experience offers insights into how nations can manage external influences while maintaining sovereignty. By examining both successes and failures, countries can formulate strategies that balance internal development with external engagement. This balanced view encourages a comprehensive understanding of global events, promoting informed decision-making in international affairs. Reflecting on the collapse of the Soviet Union reveals several key takeaways. Firstly, the importance of economic adaptability cannot be overstated. The Soviet Union's inability to reform its centralized economy led to stagnation and eventual collapse. Secondly, diplomatic engagement and alliances are crucial. The Soviet Union's isolation from Western powers limited its options and exacerbated its decline. Thirdly, internal governance and political reforms are essential for stability. The lack of political flexibility within the Soviet system contributed significantly to its downfall. For Vietnam, these lessons emphasize the need for ongoing economic reforms, active diplomatic participation, and robust internal governance. The country's experience with Doi Moi, which transformed its economy and opened it to global markets, highlights the benefits of adaptability and strategic engagement. These takeaways serve as valuable guides for nations navigating the complexities of the modern geopolitical landscape. As we conclude this analysis of the Soviet Union's collapse, it's important to reflect on the lessons learned and how they apply to current global dynamics. We invite you, our viewers, to share your thoughts and insights on this complex historical event. How do you believe the lessons from the Soviet Union's fall can be applied to today's geopolitical challenges? Your engagement is crucial for fostering a deeper understanding and dialogue about these issues. By participating in discussions and sharing diverse perspectives, we can collectively enhance our comprehension of global affairs. Stay tuned for more in-depth analyses and updates on important international developments. Your feedback is invaluable, and we encourage you to continue the conversation in the comments section below. Thank you for being an active part of our community. If you found this perspective valuable, consider subscribing. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I read every one of them. Thank you for watching.